A woman I know was told by her bishop that the ward was worried about her. Her temple recommend had lapsed. There were concerns. He said it calmly. He said he loved her and that she was valued in this ward. He said, "We just want to make sure you're in a good place spiritually." She left his office and sat in her car for 40 minutes. She said she felt like she'd been searched, like someone had gone through her dresser drawers and left her garments spilling out.
A man I know came out to his parents at 24. His mum reached across the table and took his hands. She said she loved him and she would always love him. She said, "I'm going to pray for you every single day." He said it was the kindest thing she knew to do. He said it was the last real conversation they had.
Both of those were described afterward as loving. Both of them were.
Hannah and Jess, we got away. Now we're unpacking what they won't say. Behind temple walls and cover-ups. We're pouring tea in your coffee cups. It's the post-Mormon post-mortem. Digging up what they want forgotten. Trauma, truth, and crime, yeah, we're surviving. It's post-Mormon, post-mortem.
Hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Postmortem, the podcast where we lovingly sift through the ashes of our former faith, one bizarre belief and repressed memory at a time.
We explore everything from the church's cultural weirdness and doctrinal whiplash to the deep wounds of religious trauma, Mormon crime, and the messy, glorious road to recovery.
Whether you're freshly out, years removed, or just ex-mo-curious, this really is the right place. We're here to hold space, spill tea, and call out the cultish stuff hiding in plain sight. I'm your host, Hannah.
And I'm Jess. This episode is part of an ongoing series on institutional harm, how it's delivered, how it's protected, and how it's made invisible. Today, we're not talking about the doctrine. We're talking about the delivery system.
Someone said something to you or to someone you love, and it sounded like care. They were calm. They were gentle. They may have said they loved you. And then you left the conversation feeling wounded in a way you couldn't explain. That's what made it hard to explain. It didn't sound cruel. Everyone was composed.
We're calling it the grammar of harm, 6 specific practices that operate through the same mechanism. The wound is delivered in the language of care, which means the person receiving it can't name what happened without sounding like the problem. Today, we name them one by one.
You learn this early. Calm means the spirit is there. Strong emotion means something has gone wrong. There's a verse that gets taught from primary, 3 Nephi 11:29. He that hath the spirit of contention is not of me, but is of the devil. I think that's one of the scripture mastery verses. The verse calls contention of the devil. And contention isn't treated like normal conflict. It gets treated as a spiritual warning sign. By the time you're old enough to argue with anyone, the rules are already in place. Quiet looks righteous, upset looks suspect, and the person who stays calm has the moral advantage.
The scriptural architecture for this goes deeper than one verse. The still small voice isn't just a metaphor, it's a doctrinal epistemology. God communicates in calm, which means calm is the condition for receiving truth, which means the person who is upset is, by definition, not in a receiving state. They've already cut themselves off from the source.
Tone starts getting treated like evidence of who is spiritually safe. If something is said calmly, it gets treated as loving, wise, and spiritually grounded. If somebody responds with hurt or anger, their reaction gets treated as evidence that they're the one out of alignment. At that point, the content can disappear. The calm person already sounds righteous.
And here's what that produces in practice. Someone can say, "We love you, but we're genuinely concerned for your eternal welfare." Or they can say, "The bishop needs to meet with you about your temple recommend." And because the tone is calm, because the spirit is present, the statement is, by definition, loving. The content doesn't get evaluated.
And then your response becomes the thing everyone focuses on. You were hurt. You sounded hurt. You were confused. You didn't sound peaceful. You were angry. Now, the anger is the problem. The original statement gets protected by its calm delivery, and your reaction gets treated as evidence that something is spiritually wrong here, as some might say. The harmful thing that started the exchange gets pushed out of you.
Calm person wins the spiritual authority argument automatically. It doesn't matter who was right. The spirit's departure is assigned by emotional register, not by content. James E. Faust was second counselor in the first presidency, so that's one step from the top of the entire church. In the April 1996 General Conference, he said this, quote, "When there is contention, the Spirit of the Lord will depart, regardless of who is at fault." End quote.
That line matters because it makes fault secondary. If contention makes the spirit leave, regardless of who is at fault, fault gets downgraded. The person who caused the harm and the person reacting to the harm are treated as spiritually equal because the room got tense. That gives the calm person a built-in advantage.
Right. The spirit leaves. The calm person didn't cause it. You did.
That is tone policing. It shifts attention away from what was said and onto how the injured person responded. In a normal argument, that's already dishonest. Anger doesn't make someone wrong. Calm doesn't make someone safe. But Mormonism gives tone policing spiritual backing. It isn't just, can you calm down so we can talk? It becomes, if you're upset, the spirit can't be here. If the spirit can't be here, you're the reason this conversation can't continue.
Which makes it almost impossible to name harm inside the system, because naming of harm, if it comes with any feeling attached, is itself a spiritual violation. You haven't just complained. You've driven away the spirit. Now the focus has shifted to you.
I just want to go back to this James E. Faust quote and the damage that could cause when taken to its logical conclusion. So I was in an abusive relationship, and I know that my dad's mentality, when I was talking to my parents about, like, this isn't good for me, I have to get out of this, at a time when for some reason I still thought my parents had some wisdom to bestow, I just remember my dad's response was basically, what part have you played in this? You need to reflect on what role you have played in the breakdown or whatever of this relationship. And I said, Dad, that is like if somebody was sitting on a bench in the park and someone walked up and assaulted them, just punched them right in the face. And your response was, what part did you play in this? It's like, well, I was sitting here and my face was here. That's the part I played. It equalizes, right? As if it's like, okay, yeah, my role in this relationship is being in it, is remaining in it. You're right there, but that's where it ends.
Yeah. It's interesting how you brought me right back to something my father said in a similar situation. When my parents learned that I had filed for divorce, my dad texted me and said, I can only paraphrase it here because I've long since deleted the text, but it was, I sure hope that you can consider what you've done and that Dave will consider taking you back. It's just so ignorant on your part. And it was like, what? How is this my fault? It's a divorce. It's painful. It's hard. Why are you assigning me some kind of blame or guilt? But that was just status quo. We're just talking through two lived examples of what this does in application. The focus shifts to you.
And I know that because my dad was in a position of counseling couples in marriage situations through being a bishop or on the stake presidency and things like that, that this would be the dispensed advice. I wasn't hearing anything that one of his congregants wouldn't hear, which just goes to show how
Which is
really harmful.
reprehensible, really.
Exactly. Right. Absolutely. This isn't about who wins an argument. This is about when somebody is being blocked from being recognized as the authority on their own experience, when the conversation moves away from what happened to them and onto how they are responding to it. That is a form of epistemic harm. You try to say, this hurt me. And the conversation moves immediately to your tone, your anger, your spirit, your attitude. Epistemology is how you know what you know. So if somebody is challenging that, how do you know what you know? Because it's your experience. And now you're trying to explain what happened while also proving you're allowed to understand your own experience.
So, this is the mechanism underneath everything else in this episode. A calm delivery doesn't indicate safe intent. Sometimes it means the harm was well rehearsed, institutionally approved, and dressed in language of love. The tone is always the alibi, and an alibi only works because the harm has already been done, invisibly, in the language of care, before anyone thought to look. After harm is delivered in the grammar of love, something often follows that sounds like repair. It uses apology language. It positions the speaker as humble. And it does something remarkable. It removes responsibility from the person with power while framing what happened as a perception problem.
You know the moves. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you felt hurt by what I said. The church is perfect, but the people aren't. Let's agree we could have both handled that better. They sound like repair. They never name what happened. No one says what was said. No one says why it hurt, and no one says what will change the next time. The harm gets moved into your reaction.
There's a Mormon specific version of this that's built into the doctrine itself, and Hannah just said it. The church is perfect, but the people aren't. That sentence routes every harm into individual imperfection and makes institutional accountability architecturally impossible. Any harm done within the church is, by that framing, a people problem, never a system problem. The system is pre-exonerated.
Yeah, this isn't Mormon specific, but it is certainly Mormon. We've talked about DARVO before, and this is where DARVO comes in. It's a pattern where if someone is confronted with harm, the conversation gets flipped so that then the person who caused the harm is treated like the injured party. Deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. Jennifer Freyd applied the pattern to institutions. So the church is perfect, but the people aren't. It works like institutional DARVO with scriptures. Before anyone names a specific harm, the institution has already been cleared. Doctrine doesn't have to answer for it. Leadership structure doesn't have to answer for it. So the harm has to land somewhere else, usually on a flawed local leader, a misunderstanding, a bad experience, or the person who was hurt.
Which means the person who was hurt arrives at the conversation already disadvantaged. The institution doesn't have to perform the reversal in the moment. The doctrine does it automatically.
You come in trying to name what happened. Somehow you leave managing the feelings of the person or institution that hurt you. Researchers who study apology language have found that non-apologies often make people feel worse than no apology at all. They're called non-apologies or partial apologies because they intimate repair without actually offering it. No one owns the harm, names it clearly, or commits to changing anything. So in the end, the wounded person is often the one smoothing things over.
Yeah, there's a specific mechanism for that. As Hannah mentioned, there's a lot of research around this, and research on apology and forgiveness finds that victims often sense that withholding forgiveness will trigger backlash from the offender. So they offer forgiveness that they don't actually feel. It looks like reconciliation, but it functions as a second injury.
That makes sense. And that's how a person avoids saying what they actually did. I'm sorry you were hurt. I'm sorry if that came across wrong. Sorry you took it that way. I mean, those sentences sound close to accountability, but they don't quite get there. They don't say or acknowledge, I hurt you. They don't say, what I said was wrong, or I won't do it again. And they don't say, I understand why that hurt you. Nothing has been repaired.
For comparison, here's what actual accountability sounds like. I said this specific thing. It was harmful for this specific reason. I was wrong. Here's what I will do differently.
That kind of directness can feel rude or even unfamiliar in Mormon culture. Saying exactly what happened naming why it caused harm and asking for a specific change. Especially if you haven't been taught those tools, can feel like you are being harsh, like you are making somebody feel bad. Sometimes making somebody feel bad just means refusing to protect them from the discomfort of what they did. Real repair requires that discomfort. If that's how the person feels, a non-apology wants to skip over that.
This is so common, the non-apology when I was growing up throughout my household. And it was so common that I've learned it too. I've learned it too well. I will hear myself say, well, I'm sorry that that hurt your feelings, or I'm sorry that my forgetting that was so traumatic for you, or something. And then I have to like, whoa, stop. Hold on. What just came out of my mouth? Wait a minute. I'm sorry I did this. I'm sorry I take ownership for X. It is a learned behavior that I am still learning to undo, but it was so prevalent. It still is prevalent. I will still hear my sister say something and she'll be like, well, I mean, I was just sorry that he was so upset about that. And it's like, don't be sorry he's upset. Be sorry about what you said to him that made him upset and seeing the difference. It's really hard when you're surrounded by that. And that's what you grew up listening to. Now, this isn't every Mormon family, but it is enough Mormon families that many people, I think, listening right now are probably nodding their heads.
Yeah, not just Mormon families, just families, right? It is
Right.
something we, as human animals, do want to protect our egos. And when we've hurt someone, it is an uncomfortable feeling to acknowledge that, because now I have to sit with the fact that I made somebody feel bad. I got called out on this in my grad program when we were doing this group project, and there was someone in the group who annoyed the ever living daylights out of me. And there was something that happened where I apologized to her in the most insincere way. And it was like, yeah, I'm really sorry that that hurt you. I think I delivered it more sincerely than that. But one of my peers just totally called it out and was like, that's not an apology. Just named it. That's a good friend to name what they're seeing and to say, you owe them a real apology.
Right. You have ownership there. And as Hannah and I are just describing, if you've spent years inside a system that treats reputation management and conflict resolution as equivalent, the difference can take a long time to locate between apology and non apology. Because the non apology doesn't just avoid accountability, it makes the wounded person responsible for completing the repair. So the harm is delivered and then the cleanup is yours.
Mormon culture does niceness very well. People bring casseroles, they show up with trucks when someone moves, they organize meals, check-ins, brides, baby showers, and quiet acts of practical help. That matters, for real. Those things are so helpful. Niceness and kindness are still different things.
Niceness maintains social cohesion. It keeps the surface smooth. It prioritizes the comfort of the group over the dignity of any individual within it. Kindness does the opposite. It prioritizes dignity even when that's uncomfortable for the group.
Mormon kids are taught early that being nice is part of being righteous. It isn't framed as basic manners. It's tied to spiritual maturity, obedience, and whether you are the kind of person the spirit can be around. I mean, that's how it was in my family, big time.
Mm-hmm.
The articles of faith end with, we believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and in doing good to all men. Girls hear language about of being good character, right? The young woman's values, and in primary we sang kindness begins with me. Over time, a lot of that just gets flattened into being pleasant. Don't make the room tense. Don't say things that make people uncomfortable. Don't be the reason that the spirit has to leave.
Now, the doctrinal frame for niceness in Mormon culture is Christ-like love. And the specific version of that is, and this is the phrase, love the sinner, hate the sin, which sounds like it contains both honesty and love. What it actually does is give the speaker permission to hold a condemning belief about someone while performing warmth toward them. The condemnation is private. The smile is public.
That is the problem with love the sinner, hate the sin. It lets someone act warm while treating a core part of another person's life as tragic, dangerous, or wrong. So you can smile at a same-sex wedding and still believe the marriage puts that couple in eternal jeopardy for their salvation outside of God's plans. You can bring a casserole to someone after they leave the church and then sit in Sunday school while you and others discuss apostasy like it's a disease. That keeps the relationship looking intact. Kindness doesn't ask someone else to pretend your judgment feels like love.
No. And this distinction has been made from inside the tradition. Exponent 2, a Mormon feminist publication, named it directly, quote, "Niceness is not synonymous with kindness. Niceness comes down to privileging selfish comfort over moral courage or genuine love for others." End quote. That's an inside tradition articulation. They said it, not us.
That matches what niceness does socially. A lot of niceness is fear dressed up as virtue, like fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear of saying the thing that will make the room change. So instead of being honest, people manage each other. They watch the room and soften the sentence and decide how much truth can be said out loud. And the person being managed can't point to one obvious cruel thing because everybody is still being so pleasant.
Amira Barger, writing about the social function of niceness, argues that niceness is not morality but social control, the polite enforcement mechanism that keeps power comfortable and dissent contained. She wasn't offering a critique of Mormon culture specifically. It's a description of what niceness does as a social technology. Mormon culture has built that technology into its theology.
In Mormon culture, that enforcement mechanism already has a name. We talked about it. Contention. Okay, so once you've learned early that contention drives the spirit away, keeping the surface smooth is a spiritual obligation. That is so reinforced in Mormon families, especially as you've got so many siblings so close together. There's probably a lot of chaos just naturally. So that confusion gets taught early because kids are taught that niceness is love and calm is safety and discomfort means someone's done something wrong. Then you grow up and someone hurts you with a pleasant face. Because everyone stayed nice, it might not register as harm. It can register as a conversation you failed to handle correctly.
Yeah, 20 years of casseroles and calm voices will do that. Not kind, nice.
Right. I know. Kindness is loving someone well, and sometimes that means like doing the difficult thing. One of the harder things to face is that niceness probably taught you how to confuse other people too. There were probably moments when somebody needed honesty and you gave them warmth with a boundary hidden inside, and I'm talking to myself here. A softened sentence, a pleasant face, a spiritual explanation for why you didn't have to stay with the discomfort. Maybe I was nice when kindness would have cost me more. And that means at some point, I was part of the delivery system too. I learned the same grammar everyone else was learning. Niceness is the uniform. The next practice is what gets said while wearing it.
"We're worried about you" sounds like care. In Mormon family and community contexts, it often functions as a frame, one that positions the speaker as loving and the recipient as the problem, and forecloses any attempt to set a limit as a rejection of that love.
Once you recognize it, the meaning is pretty consistent. In our analysis, "we're worried about you" can often mean your choices are making us uncomfortable and we need you to change so that we can feel okay again. "We're concerned about your testimony" often means you're asking questions we can't answer, and that threatens the story that we need to stay intact. "We're praying for you" often means we're hoping God brings you back into alignment so we don't have to examine what your leaving brings up in us. That makes it hard to argue with. The concern may be genuine. It still pressures you to become easier for them to live with.
And the doctrinal stakes amplify all of it. This isn't just concern about your well being in this life. Mormon concern operates across eternity. The doctrine of eternal families means that a child leaving the church isn't just a loss in the present, it's a permanent fracture in the ceiling, the eternal marriage bond, the eternal unit. Research on leaving Mormonism describes it as contemplating the loss of fundamental and identity formational values, cultural practices, beliefs, and primary relationships. And we see this in our work with clients. The concern is real, and it's also doing enormous pressure work because it carries the weight of forever.
Yeah, and that is why this lands so heavily. It isn't just we miss you or we're worried about where you're going. The message is your life, the way you're choosing to live it, is threatening our family's eternal story. That is too much to put on one person. It makes boundaries feel incredibly difficult, almost impossible for sometimes in some families. Saying you don't get to talk to me that way can feel extremely unfamiliar, like breaking something sacred, like you are disappointing your parents and you are being treated like the reason that the forever family might not stay together forever.
Genuine concern asks, "Are you okay? What do you need?" It makes room for the answer to be something the concerned person didn't expect or want. Concern that arrives with the outcome already determined isn't making room for the other person's well being. It's just making room for a particular outcome.
This exists outside of religion too. It's sometimes called concern trolling, using the language of care to interfere with someone else's choices. The care language gives the interference cover. If you were raised in a home where that was used, where the language of being worried about you was used as a form of control, it might sound familiar. If the person pushes back, that boundary becomes proof, becomes evidence that they are defensive or uncaring themselves. They are angry, they're lost, they're unstable. They need an intervention, whatever word fits the setting. But the boundary becomes the evidence that the boundary needs to be overstepped, right? Care equals I can overstep this boundary.
So, this is exactly the trap. The trap has three moves. The concern frames the speaker as loving and the recipient as the thing that needs correcting. Any attempt to set a limit gets reframed as rejecting their love. Any expression of frustration becomes evidence that the recipient is not handling things well, which validates the original concern. So the concerned party becomes the victim of your ingratitude.
Right. You usually find out whether it was concern or control when you don't respond the way they hoped or anticipated. We're worried about you. It can feel like connection at first. Maybe your family, they noticed something had changed and they reached out to you in the language they knew. But then you set a limit or you don't come back or you don't give them the reassurance that they were looking for. And now the concern has conditions attached. Now your boundary is hurtful. Your distance is selfish. Your frustration or whatever strong emotion you might express is proof that something is really wrong and that something is you. And that's when you realize that the concern actually came with an assignment.
And that's why pushing back can make everything worse. The more you try to protect your own choices, the more they might read that as proof that you're slipping away. You say, "I need you to stop." They hear, "She's angry." You say, "This isn't up for discussion." They hear, "He's hard in his heart." You try to reclaim your own life, and the resistance itself becomes evidence against you. In my experience, worry without any respect for your agency may sound like care, but it can function like control. Sometimes the only way out of this is to agree that something is wrong with you. Concern is the frame. The next practice is the specific verbal move that closes the conversation before it becomes a real one.
Hey, real quick, before we jump to the next practice, quick thing. If you have been listening and you're enjoying the show, please hit like or subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. And if you think of a friend who might appreciate this, then forward it to them too. Thank you.
So this one is one of my favorites. I see it all the time. We get it in the comment section of our Instagram reels and Instagram posts. It goes like this: "I'll pray for you." It does several things at once, and it does all of them while sounding like the most loving possible response to someone's pain or difference.
It puts the speaker in the role of spiritual helper. That quietly puts the recipient of the prayer in the role of someone who needs to be fixed. It also lets them hand the hard part of the conversation to God. They don't have to stay in the discomfort of what you just told them. They can pray because prayer is sacred. Objecting to that makes you sound hostile to faith. What are you going to say? Don't pray for me?
Right. There's a concept in psychology called spiritual bypassing. It was developed by the psychologist John Welwood. Spiritual bypassing is the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. Welwood called it caring from a safe distance, performing love without risking relationship. The prayer is sincere. It's also an exit.
Wellwood's point is that spiritual practice can become a way to avoid the relationship right in front of you. Spiritual practice can protect the avoidance. Distance can look mature, and emotional disengagement can look peaceful and wise and faithful. So, as Jess said, I'll pray for you can become a way to care from a distance without the person having to stay in the risk of the relationship. You don't have to ask what you need from them. They don't have to hear how their beliefs are landing on you. That's why my mum communicates by letter. They don't have to sit with the grief or anger or confusion in the room. They put all of that into prayer. It sounds intimate, but it really lets them hold the relationship at arm's length or move away.
And in Mormon context, the prayer is never just personal. It's embedded in a community that collectively agrees that the person being prayed for has a problem. The ward prays together. The family fasts together. When communities engage in spiritual bypassing together, researchers note, they cannot hold space for people in a deep or trustworthy way, and no one is held accountable for the interpersonal harm that may be occurring because everyone is oriented toward transcendence rather than present relationship.
Yeah, in Mormonism, prayer can be a group response to someone's life. Like you said, Jess, the ward fasts and prays together. Like maybe they're given an assignment, a particular person on a particular day, and then your name is put on the prayer rolls of the temple, and anybody can do that for anyone. I guarantee your name has been put on, and mine.
Several times.
More times than I'm sure you know. Everybody is participating in this care while also agreeing on the premise that you need fixing, right? You need a spiritual intervention. So then instead of having people stay in the actual relationship, they can just sort of move the whole thing upwards to God and make it about faith in heaven and revelation and priesthood, blessings, fasting, temple names, whatever language fits the moment. No one has to ask the harder questions. What made this person feel unsafe here? What did they tell us that we didn't want to hear? What are we unwilling to sit with? What are we calling love that isn't feeling like love to other people? What are we calling love that is actually distance? It closes a door while everyone agrees they are holding it open.
This is something, I'll pray for you. I know I said earlier it's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites. I say that facetiously. I'll clarify. My dad, this is one of his trademark lines. Whenever he hears us say something, when we articulate, this is why, these are the things about the church that I disagree with. These are the aspects of living in Mormon culture that harmed me. These are the reasons that I can no longer participate in this and you can't proselytize to my kids. His go-to line is, Jessica, I'll pray for you. I'll pray that one day you'll reread the Book of Mormon, you'll see the light. I'll just pray for you that one day you'll fix your wayward ways. And it's complete and utter bullshit. It is him shutting down any chance of an honest conversation about what my experience is and appealing to some higher authority to correct my wayward ways and make it easier for him to have a relationship with me because I see things so differently.
So instead of answering the questions, because the question might just be, how do you make sense of this, right? So, like, how
Right.
do you account for, I mean, my parents, they know what I believe and don't believe, but I'm sometimes curious about how they maintain their beliefs about certain things. It's a genuine curiosity, not a gotcha. It's like, I want to have a conversation with you about what you believe. When you don't share those beliefs, for people like our parents, put a distance there. In fact, I've had so many people say this, that when they left the church, their parents were like, well, we've got nothing to talk to you about anymore. Like,
That's
what do we
terrible.
have in common?
That's just it. We don't have to talk to you about it anymore. That's the conversation that really needed to happen, getting replaced with this idea, this promise that I'll pray for you and God will somehow fix this. And that promise let everyone leave the room feeling like they've done something loving, giving it up to God. That's the self-sealing quality in this whole thing. The exit from the conversation is lined with sincerity.
Sharing your testimony is one of the most sincere things a Mormon can offer. You are taught that it is intimate, personal, spiritual evidence to say, I know the church is true. I know Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know this is God's plan. That language is treated like a gift that you're giving someone. It's what you offer someone when they are struggling, doubting, grieving, leaving.
And the I know language matters. It's not casual. Boyd K. Packer, longtime president of the Quorum of the 12 and one of the most influential doctrinal voices in the modern church, taught that a testimony is to be found in the bearing of it. Meaning, say it until it becomes true for you. The language of certainty is the practice. The certainty comes from repeating the certainty, which means the I know that gets directed at someone in a faith crisis isn't just a statement of belief, it's a reflex. The speaker has been practicing that certainty since primary.
Yeah, that certainty can land like a weapon, even when the person believes they are offering love. That certainty can sound like truth. But as Jess said, it is rehearsed and performed. Most of the time, this isn't nefarious. People believe that they are doing the most loving thing that they can give you. You bring doubt or grief or questions they can't answer or a life they don't understand, and then they respond with certainty. I know the church is true. I want to bear my testimony to you that even though I don't have any answers, this is still true. So once that certainty enters the room, the conversation usually ends. It's not going anywhere.
It does, and Mormon scholars have said this directly. A 2013 essay at Times and Seasons, a blog run by LDS academics, acknowledged that bearing your testimony is a conversation ender. Sometimes that is what is called for. That was a direct quote. That's not us saying it.
When someone's conclusion is tied that tightly to their identity, new information lands as a threat. Questions can feel like an attack. Pain sounds like rebellion. Doubt sounds like danger. The person stops responding to what you said, they return to what they know. And then at that point, the testimony replaces the conversation. And I've been there so many times.
When someone shares a faith crisis and the response is a testimony, I just want you to know that I know the church is true. The message you receive is your experience doesn't require engagement, it requires correction. And I'm not able to sit with your uncertainty because my certainty is what I'm offering you instead. What they needed was someone willing to be in that place of questioning alongside them. What they received was someone doubling down on knowing. Researchers studying therapeutic conversation have observed that certainty closes doors, that the willingness to not know is what creates space for new understanding to emerge. A testimony structurally forecloses that space.
Yeah, that is so true. That certainty takes up the space where your experience should have gone. Because testimony is treated as love, you're left trying to explain why it felt like a door closed. They didn't yell or insult you. They may have cried while they said it. They testified, and inside Mormonism, as I said, that's one of the most loving things that you can do. My mum, as I said, she likes to do all this in letter form more than anything, which is really one of the most, like, you will receive what I have to say, and I don't have to take anything in back from you.
It's so passive aggressive. It's astonishing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yes, I could write a letter back, but this isn't a dialogue, right? It's a
And
monologue, then a monologue, then a monologue, then a monologue. So, yeah, it's interesting. That's always been her preferred method of communication.
so here's what this looks like in many families, in mine included. When my youngest sister was having a faith crisis, it happened actually while she was on her mission. She had memories come up of abuse that had happened to her as a very young child. When she reached out to my parents for help and for guidance to explain, I think I should come home. I'm struggling. I have all of this bubbling up and it's hard to deal with and it's causing me great distress. My father told her, I know this church is true. I know that you need to stay and promulgate the word of the Lord. I know that you were called there for a purpose. I know this church is true. Never responded to the ask. Never sat with her and said, help me understand. What are you experiencing? What have you gone through? Instead, he bore his testimony to her and compelled her to stay.
I can feel the fear underneath that. That is, we were saying this is driven by fear. It's not driven by love, is it? It's driven by a fear of losing control, essentially, that somebody is deviating from the way that you want them to be. These 6 practices are doing the same thing. Someone says something that sounds like love, and you leave feeling hurt, confused, or ashamed. Then, when you try to name what happened, it turns back on you. You're too sensitive. You misunderstood. You're angry. You swore. Goodness, if you use bad language, then all bets are off. You're contentious. You're rejecting love. Research on microaggressions describes that second layer clearly. The original harm, that's the first arrow with Buddhism, right? It's hard enough to name. And then the person who names it often has their experience disputed and their reaction put on trial. That is the pattern underneath all 6 practices. The first harm is what was said. The second harm is being made responsible for the discomfort caused by naming it.
None of these require malicious intent to cause harm. Most of the people who use them believe they are doing exactly what love requires. That belief is part of the system. The speaker is protected by their own sincerity.
Naming it probably won't change the people who did it. It can change what happens inside you when you experience it or remember. That conversation that left you sitting in your car or lying awake at night or trying to explain why something loving felt so bad, you weren't making that up. You were trying to name a structure that made naming it feel like the problem.
Words were always there, and now they belong to you. If this episode hit close to home, if it made something click, you belong here. Find us on Instagram or TikTok at Postmormon Postmortem or at postmormonpostmortem.com. A 5-star rating really helps other people find us, and subscribing helps us grow this chosen family, and it genuinely makes a difference.
You can also support us in our research and podcast development. We are on Buy Me a Coffee and on Patreon with different membership levels. The easiest is just $2 a month for ad-free listening on Patreon. As a wrap, we have to say, as always, how thankful we are to Hannah W. for her amazing vocals, to Dr. Dave for his guitar riffs, and for Mick for making our theme song sound amazing.
Hannah, before we go, oh man, after going through this episode, I am especially sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
And I also am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon. That's a full apology, not a partial one.